It's time to find out what's really going on with the workers here. They won't expect the janitor to be investigating.
You're nothing but trash! Get out of my sight! Look at the mess.
Look at this mess. Get this cleaned up right now before someone falls.
They laughed at the janitor, mocked him, and even poured soapy water over his head, because they thought he was nobody. For 5 days, he endured their cruelty in silence, watching, listening, remembering. On the 6th day, he walked into the boardroom in a tailored suit and introduced himself as their new CEO. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share, and now let's dive into the story. The headquarters of coal industries had never felt so tense. From the glossy marble lobby to the executive floor lined with glass offices, employees moved with unusual urgency. Managers straightened their tailored suits and adjusted silk ties. Assistants hurried through corridors clutching tablets and neatly stacked folders. Department heads held last-minute meetings behind closed doors, reviewing reports again and again to ensure every detail was flawless. The reason was simple. The new CEO was arriving. No one had seen him before. After the sudden retirement of the former chief executive, the board had appointed a young billionaire investor known for transforming struggling companies into global powerhouses. His reputation preceded him. He was described as brilliant, calculating, and intolerant of incompetence. Some claimed he was ruthless. Others insisted he rewarded loyalty generously. Stories about him circulated through every department like wildfire. But one thing was certain: everyone wanted to impress him. What no one realized was that he had already arrived. At exactly 6:30 that morning, a modest dark sedan rolled quietly into the back parking lot of the towering glass building. The engine shut off, and a tall man stepped out. He wore worn brown work boots, faded dark trousers, and a simple gray janitor's uniform. A stitched name tag rested neatly over his chest. It read Darius. His hair was neatly trimmed in a clean low cut. A pair of simple rectangular glasses framed intelligent, observant eyes. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that hinted at wealth or power. But this was Ethan Cole, the new CEO. Instead of entering through the grand front doors to applause and formal introductions, he walked calmly toward the service entrance at the back of the building, pushing open the heavy metal door while pulling a yellow mop bucket behind him. Only the chairman of the board knew about his plan. Ethan didn't want rehearsed smiles or carefully scripted presentations. He didn't want polished speeches or staged professionalism. He wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. He wanted to see how his company functioned when no one believed they were being evaluated. Within minutes of stepping inside, he began noticing the difference between corporate image and reality. Managers who had just spoken passionately about teamwork during morning briefings barked orders at interns without a trace of patience. A supervisor snapped sharply at a receptionist for placing a call on hold too long. In the break room, 2 employees laughed openly about manipulating expense reports, unaware of the janitor mopping quietly just feet away. No one acknowledged him. Most didn't even look at him. He moved through the hallway silently, pushing his cart, listening carefully. Conversations flowed around him as if he were invisible, as if he were part of the furniture. Before noon, a sharply dressed executive exited the elevator, eyes glued to his smartphone. Without glancing up, he handed Ethan an empty coffee cup. "Throw this away," the man muttered, as if speaking to an automated machine. There was no greeting. No please. No eye contact. Ethan simply nodded and took the cup. He reminded himself that he was not here to react. He was here to observe. As he made his way toward the marketing department, fragments of conversation drifted through the open office space. "Just let her handle it. She'll stay late like always," one employee muttered. "Yeah," another replied with a chuckle. "She doesn't know how to say no." Curious, Ethan glanced toward a glass-walled office nearby. Inside sat a young woman surrounded by files, sticky notes, and an open laptop glowing with spreadsheets and campaign visuals. A small nameplate on her desk read, Lena Harper, Junior Creative Analyst. While others prepared for lunch and casual conversation, Lena typed intensely, brows furrowed in concentration. Moments later, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stormed into her office. Even from across the floor, Ethan could hear the sharpness in his voice. "This draft isn't polished enough," the supervisor said coldly, tossing a folder onto her desk. "Do it again, and make sure it's ready before tomorrow's meeting." Lena looked startled. But the deadline was originally Friday. "Excuses don't build careers," he interrupted sharply before turning and walking out. The glass door shut behind him. Ethan paused his mopping briefly. He noticed something subtle but revealing. Lena didn't argue. She didn't complain. She simply inhaled slowly, straightened her shoulders, and returned to her work. Later that afternoon, as Ethan emptied the trash near her desk, a group of colleagues walked past her office. "Of course she'll fix it," one of them whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "She basically lives here." Soft laughter followed as they continued down the hall. Lena's fingers froze over the keyboard for half a second. Just half a second. Then she continued typing. When Ethan approached her desk to remove the wastebasket, she glanced up and offered him a small, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about the mess," she said gently, gesturing to the scattered papers around her. "It's been a long day." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him with basic courtesy. "No problem," he replied calmly, careful to keep his voice neutral. For the first time that day, he felt something other than disappointment. He felt curiosity. There was resilience in her posture, strength beneath exhaustion. As the workday came to an end, most employees left promptly at 5 o'clock. Their laughter echoed through the hallway as they discussed dinner plans and weekend outings. The supervisor who had scolded Lena earlier walked past her desk again, speaking casually on his phone about restaurant reservations. He didn't acknowledge her. Lena remained seated, still working. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as evening settled in. Ethan continued his cleaning rounds slowly, mentally recording everything he had witnessed: the arrogance, the casual dishonesty, the quiet exploitation. The company's annual reports boasted of innovation, teamwork, and visionary leadership. But beneath the glossy numbers and polished branding, cracks were beginning to show. Standing alone in the dimming office, city lights beginning to glow beyond the windows, Ethan realized something sobering. The true condition of a company is not revealed in profit margins. It is revealed in how people treat those they believe can do nothing for them. And on his very first day as Darius the janitor, what he had discovered was far from reassuring. By the second day, Ethan understood something with painful clarity. At Cole Industries, respect was not earned through character. It was granted by title. Without one, you were nothing. Dressed in his gray janitor's uniform with Darius stitched neatly over the pocket, he pushed his cleaning cart through the long glass corridors while conversations drifted around him. People walked past without slowing, without nodding, without seeing him. It was as though he had ceased to be a man and had become an object. The anticipation for the CEO's official arrival only intensified the hypocrisy. Departments held meetings about professional culture and leadership excellence. Yet in the very next breath, managers spoke down to assistants as if they were disposable. That morning, Ethan paused near a conference room where a presentation slide projected boldly onto a screen read, "Building a culture of respect." Inside, sharply dressed managers nodded seriously as one of them spoke about workplace values. Minutes later, outside the same room, that same manager snapped at a young assistant for printing the wrong version of a report. "Do I have to do everything myself?" he barked. The assistant apologized quietly. Ethan continued mopping. He said nothing. He listened to everything. Before noon, an incident unfolded near the copier station that confirmed his growing concerns. A group from the sales department stood gathered beside the printer, laughing about something on one of their phones. As Ethan passed by, one of them casually knocked a thick stack of freshly printed reports off the counter. Papers scattered across the polished floor. The man looked directly at him and smirked. "Well," he said, nudging the papers with the toe of his polished shoe. That's your department, right? The others laughed. Ethan met his gaze briefly, then knelt down and began gathering the scattered sheets without a word. His movements were steady, controlled. What unsettled him more than the mockery was how ordinary it seemed. Employees walked past. No one intervened. No one even frowned. It was normal. Later that afternoon, Ethan was assigned to clean a storage room on the executive floor. The space was narrow and lined with metal shelves stacked with paper boxes, archived files, and cleaning supplies. He organized the shelves carefully, placing items back in order. Then, without warning, the heavy door behind him slammed shut. The light flicked off. Darkness swallowed the room. For a moment, there was silence. Then muffled laughter echoed from outside the door. "Let's see how long he stays in there," someone whispered. Ethan stood still, breathing evenly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and turned on the flashlight. A narrow beam of white light cut through the darkness. He could have called security. He could have revealed himself. Instead, he waited. He wanted to see how far they would go. Nearly 15 minutes passed before the door swung open again. Bright hallway light flooded in. A junior manager stood in the doorway wearing a tailored light gray suit. "Oh," the man said with exaggerated innocence. "Didn't realize anyone was in here." His grin betrayed him. Ethan stepped past him calmly, pushing his cart forward. Inside, disappointment burned quietly. These were not careless teenagers. They were professionals entrusted with leadership. On the third day, Ethan turned his focus toward the marketing department, toward Lena. He began to notice a troubling pattern. During a brainstorming session in the main conference room, Lena stood nervously beside the presentation screen and shared a bold new campaign concept. It was innovative, data-driven, and ambitious. The room fell silent. Her supervisor, Mr. Calloway, leaned back in his chair. "It's too ambitious," he said flatly. "Let's stay realistic." The meeting moved on. Lena returned to her seat without argument. Later that same afternoon, Ethan passed by Calloway's private office and heard a familiar phrase through the slightly open door. He slowed his pace. Inside, Calloway stood confidently before a video call screen, presenting the very same idea Lena had proposed earlier, now reframed as his refined strategy. His tone was proud, convincing. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. The theft was not accidental. It was calculated. By the fourth day, Lena's exhaustion was impossible to ignore. She arrived earlier than most and left long after others had gone home. While colleagues gathered in the break room discussing weekend plans, she remained at her desk reviewing spreadsheets and revising drafts. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. When Ethan approached to empty her trash, he paused. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. She gave a faint, tired smile. "Deadlines don't rest," she replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, only resignation. As Ethan wiped down a nearby conference table later that afternoon, two co-workers entered the room unaware of his presence. "Calloway's presenting Lena's numbers tomorrow," one whispered. "Does she even realize?" the other asked. "She's too soft to fight back," came the response. "That's why he keeps doing it." Ethan's heart sank. This wasn't simple office politics. It was systematic exploitation. And yet, despite everything, Lena remained kind. On the fourth afternoon, one of the same sales employees who had mocked Ethan earlier stepped onto the freshly mopped floor and exaggerated a complaint. "Careful," he said sarcastically. "Wouldn't want to slip. Maybe you missed a spot." Before Ethan could respond, Lena looked up from her desk. "It was just cleaned," she said calmly. "Let's not make his job harder." The sales employee rolled his eyes but walked away. It was a small act, almost invisible. But to Ethan it carried weight. Kindness offered when there is nothing to gain reveals character more clearly than any grand gesture ever could. By the fifth day, tension hummed through the office like electricity. The official CEO arrival had been scheduled for the next morning. Employees speculated wildly about what he would be like. Some boasted about how prepared they were to impress him. Others nervously reviewed reports again and again. Meanwhile, the same individuals who practiced cruelty toward a janitor rehearsed speeches about teamwork and integrity. That afternoon, Ethan witnessed the most painful moment yet. Lena was called into Mr. Calloway's office. The glass walls did little to soften the sharpness of his raised voice. "This client proposal lacks clarity," he snapped. Ethan knew Lena had stayed nearly until midnight perfecting it. "If this fails," Calloway continued, "it reflects on me." Lena attempted to explain that the additional data he insisted on including had complicated the narrative. He silenced her with a glare. "Just fix it." When she exited the office, her composure nearly shattered. She paused near the window, blinking rapidly, steadying herself before returning to her desk. Ethan pretended to organize supplies nearby, giving her space while still offering silent support. "Some people don't see what's right in front of them," he said gently. She looked at him, surprised by the quiet depth in his voice. "Maybe one day they will," she replied softly. As the office emptied that evening and the hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the halls, Ethan stood alone. Over 5 days, he had endured humiliation. He had witnessed corruption disguised as leadership and fear disguised as authority. But he had also discovered something rare: integrity. His initial goal had been simple: evaluate performance and culture. Instead, he had uncovered something deeper: a test of humanity. And many had already failed. By the morning of the 5th day, the atmosphere inside Coal Industries was thick with restless excitement. The official email had gone out the night before confirming it. The new CEO would be revealed the following morning in a mandatory all-staff meeting. The announcement spread through every department, intensifying the already buzzing speculation. In the break room, employees debated confidently. "I heard he's in his 50s. Old school. Strict. No, he's young. Tech background. Probably ruthless." Some imagined a gray-haired corporate veteran with decades of experience. Others pictured a cold, calculating prodigy in a sharp designer suit. What none of them imagined was that he had been emptying their trash bins all week. Dressed in his gray janitor's uniform with Darius stitched across his chest, Ethan moved quietly through the halls. His expression remained calm, but his thoughts were heavy. Over the past 4 days, he had gathered more than enough evidence. Audio recordings stored discreetly on his phone, written notes documenting timestamps and incidents, observations carefully memorized. But what disturbed him most was not a single act of arrogance. It was the normalization of cruelty. Disrespect had become culture. Exploitation had become strategy. And fear had become management. That afternoon, the marketing department gathered in the main executive conference room to present a major proposal to senior leadership. The polished mahogany table gleamed beneath bright overhead lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline beyond. Lena sat at the far end of the table, her laptop open, fingers hovering just above the keyboard. She wore a cream blouse tucked into tailored black slacks, her natural curls framing a face that carried both exhaustion and determination. On the large presentation screen behind Mr. Calloway, slides displayed data projections and campaign strategies, all built from Lena's research. Weeks of analysis, sleepless nights, careful revisions. Yet on the final slide, her name appeared only in small print beneath the words. Supporting team. At the head of the table stood Mr. Calloway, confident and composed in a tailored charcoal suit and burgundy tie. He held a presentation remote loosely in one hand, posture relaxed, voice smooth. Near the back wall, Darius stood beside a cabinet, wiping its surface slowly, listening carefully. The presentation began flawlessly. Calloway spoke with charisma, outlining his strategy and his creative direction. Executives nodded in approval. Lena adjusted slides quietly when prompted, speaking only when necessary. Then, midway through the presentation, a senior executive leaned forward. "Can you clarify the projected revenue margins for Q4?" he asked sharply. Calloway paused. Just slightly. The polished confidence in his face flickered. He glanced back at Lena, irritation flashing across his eyes. "Those numbers were part of your draft," he muttered under his breath. Lena immediately navigated to the appropriate spreadsheet on her laptop. Yes, she began clearly. Based on the projected engagement rate, the revenue increase would. That's not the latest version, Calloway cut in abruptly. I revised it this morning. A ripple of confusion passed around the table. The senior executive frowned. The numbers don't align with what we received earlier. Silence fell over the room. Tense. Heavy. Sensing his credibility slipping, Calloway made a reckless decision. There must have been a leak, he said sharply. Someone shared an outdated file. His gaze shifted toward Lena. You were responsible for organizing the drafts. The accusation struck like a slap. Lena froze. I followed the protocol, she stammered. I sent only the approved version. Then explain the discrepancy, Calloway demanded loudly, ensuring every executive heard him. Whispers began circulating around the table. At the back of the room, Ethan felt anger surge in his chest. He knew exactly what had happened. Calloway had altered the data late the previous night, without fully understanding the projections. The inconsistencies were his own doing. And now, instead of accepting responsibility, he was offering Lena as a scapegoat. This is unacceptable, Calloway continued, his voice rising. Confidential errors damage reputations. We can't afford incompetence. Lena's face drained of color. I would never leak anything, she said softly, her voice trembling but sincere. Something inside Ethan shifted. Before he could stop himself, he stepped slightly forward. Sir, he said carefully, I saw her working late every night this week. She seemed very thorough. The room turned. Every head pivoted toward him. The janitor had spoken. Calloway's expression darkened immediately. This doesn't concern you, he snapped. Stick to cleaning. A few executives chuckled nervously. Humiliation thickened the air. Lena lowered her gaze, mortified that even a janitor was attempting to defend her when her colleagues remained silent. The senior executive at the table cleared his throat. We'll review the documents and revisit this, he said firmly, signaling the meeting's abrupt end. Chairs scraped against the floor. Papers shuffled. Low whispers filled the room as people exited. Calloway leaned close to Lena before leaving. If this traces back to you, he said coldly, you'll be packing your desk. Then he walked out. The room emptied. Lena remained standing beside the table, staring at the darkened presentation screen. For a moment, her composure shattered. She pressed her palm flat against the polished surface, steadying herself, refusing to let tears fall. Ethan approached quietly. You know the truth, he said gently. That matters. She gave a hollow laugh. Truth doesn't always matter in offices like this, she replied. Titles do. Her words struck him deeply, because that was exactly what he had been testing. That evening, long after the building had emptied, Ethan sat alone in the small custodial closet. The fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. Metal shelves lined the walls. He reviewed everything he had recorded over the past week. The locked storage room. The stolen ideas. The mocking laughter. The careless accusation. But the image that lingered most was Lena standing alone in that conference room, accused for a mistake that wasn't hers. He had begun this experiment out of strategic curiosity. He wanted insight into leadership dynamics and performance. Instead, he had uncovered a moral crisis. The breaking point wasn't the disrespect he endured. It was watching integrity punished while manipulation thrived. He removed his glasses and rubbed his temples slowly. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. As CEO, he could not allow this culture to continue. Not for profit. Not for convenience. Not for anyone. He reached for his phone and dialed the chairman. Call an all-staff meeting for tomorrow morning, he said firmly. Mandatory attendance. There was a pause on the other end. Are you ready to step forward? The chairman asked. Ethan looked down the dim hallway beyond the closet door, remembering every insult, every injustice. Yes, he replied. His voice was steady. It's time they meet their CEO. The conference hall at Cole Industries had never been this full. Rows of neatly arranged chairs stretched from the stage to the back wall. The polished floors reflected the soft overhead lighting, and a massive LED screen displayed the company logo in bold silver letters. Employees filled every seat. Conversations buzzed through the room in hushed waves of curiosity and anxiety. This is it. We finally get to see him. I heard he's brutal with restructuring. Men in tailored navy and charcoal suits adjusted their ties. Women in elegant blazers and fitted dresses sat upright with composed expressions, tablets resting on their laps. Some appeared confident. Others masked their nerves poorly. Midway through the crowd sat Lena. She wore a soft gray blazer over a beige blouse, her posture straight, but her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind. The accusation, the whispers, the threat. She had barely slept. On stage, the chairman stepped up to the podium. Distinguished and composed, he adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," he began smoothly. The room fell silent. As you all know, coal industries has entered a new chapter. He spoke of growth, responsibility, vision, of strengthening the company's foundation, of accountability and excellence. Employees nodded along, waiting for the moment. "And now," the chairman said, glancing toward the back of the room, "it is my honor to introduce your new chief executive officer." A beat of silence followed. Then, the double doors at the rear of the hall opened. Bright hallway lights spilled dramatically into the dimmer conference space. A tall figure stepped through. Conversations died instantly. Footsteps echoed steadily against the polished floor as the man walked forward with calm, measured confidence. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, crisp white shirt, slim black tie, polished dress shoes that caught the light. A subtle luxury watch rested at his wrist. His posture was upright, unshaken. His expression was calm and unmistakable. Recognition rippled through the room like electricity. The janitor. Gasps broke the silence. A sales manager's mouth fell open. A woman in the front row covered her lips in shock. Whispers erupted in scattered waves. It can't be." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Darius." Except he wasn't Darius. He walked up the steps to the stage and stood beside the chairman, who stepped aside respectfully. The room was frozen. The man they had ignored, mocked, locked in a storage room. He took his place at the podium. "My name," he began calmly, his voice clear and steady, "is Ethan Cole." Silence deepened. "And for the past 5 days, I have had the privilege of working among you." A ripple of discomfort moved across the audience. "I wanted to understand this company beyond performance metrics and quarterly reports. I wanted to see how leadership functions when it believes no one is watching." His gaze moved slowly across the room. "I have seen excellence," he continued, "but I have also witnessed something deeply concerning." The LED screen behind him flickered to life. Documents appeared. Timestamped notes. Security logs. Email records. A murmur spread through the audience. "In the past week," Ethan said calmly, "I was deliberately locked inside a storage room." A few heads snapped downward. "I observed the mishandling of expense reports." Several employees shifted uncomfortably. "I witnessed repeated instances of idea appropriation and public humiliation." The room grew colder. In the front row, Mr. Calloway sat rigidly in his seat, his jaw clenched. Ethan's gaze landed on him briefly, not with anger, but with certainty. "Leadership is not defined by control," Ethan continued. "It is defined by integrity." He pressed the remote again. A slide appeared detailing the altered financial projections from the previous day's presentation. "These discrepancies," Ethan said, "were not the result of a leak. They were the result of last-minute data manipulation." All eyes shifted toward Calloway. The color drained from his face. Ethan's voice did not rise. He did not need it to. Accountability begins at the top. The room was utterly silent. "Effective immediately," Ethan said firmly. "Mr. Calloway is relieved of his duties." A sharp intake of breath swept across the hall. 2 security personnel approached discreetly from the side aisle. Calloway stood slowly, his earlier authority evaporated. His tailored suit no longer shielded him. He avoided eye contact as he was escorted toward the exit. No one laughed. No one spoke. For the first time, silence meant reflection, not fear. When the doors closed behind him, Ethan let the moment settle. Then his gaze shifted toward the middle rows. "Lena Harper," he said clearly. Her heart nearly stopped. 100 eyes turned toward her. "Would you please join me on stage?" Her legs felt unsteady as she rose. The crowd parted slightly to allow her through. She walked toward the stage in a haze, unsure whether she was dreaming. Ethan extended his hand to help her up the final step. She took it. The warmth of his grip was steady, reassuring. When she stood beside him, he turned back to the audience. The campaign strategy presented yesterday was built on weeks of dedicated research, he said. Research led by Ms. Harper. The screen shifted. A new slide appeared. Creative lead, Lena Harper. Applause began softly, then grew louder. Some employees rose to their feet. Lena's eyes filled, but this time she did not look down. She stood taller. "This company," Ethan continued, "will not reward manipulation. It will reward integrity." He looked at Lena briefly, not as a janitor, not as a distant executive, but as someone who had seen her strength when she believed no one important was watching. "Effective immediately," he announced, "Lena Harper is promoted to head of creative strategy." The applause swelled into a full standing ovation. In that moment, something shifted inside the company. Fear loosened its grip. For the first time in years, accountability felt real. As the applause continued, Ethan glanced out over the crowd, not with pride and power, but with conviction. The experiment was over. The rebuilding had begun. The weeks following the revelation transformed coal industries in ways no one had expected, and many had desperately needed. The shift was not loud. It was steady, intentional, visible in small but meaningful ways. Morning meetings no longer carried the tight undercurrent of fear. Assistants spoke without flinching. Junior analysts contributed ideas without glancing nervously at supervisors for approval. Conversations in hallways felt lighter, more professional, less predatory. Policies were rewritten. Anonymous reporting systems were strengthened. Performance reviews were no longer built on intimidation, but on measurable contribution and collaboration. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Cole, no longer disguised, no longer observing from the margins. He led with clarity, not cruelty. One Monday morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the executive boardroom as Ethan addressed his senior leadership team. "Accountability isn't a punishment," he said calmly. "It's a foundation." The words were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were enforced through action. Departments that had quietly relied on manipulation were restructured. Managers who thrived on fear either adapted or exited. Transparency became expectation, not suggestion. And then there was Lena. Her transition into the role of head of creative strategy was not ceremonial. It was earned. The first time she stepped into her new office, she paused near the doorway. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. A sleek wooden desk sat centered beneath natural light. On its surface rested a polished nameplate. Lena Harper, head of creative strategy. She exhaled slowly, not in disbelief, but in gratitude. Her first week in the role was demanding, but different. She no longer worked in silence while others claimed her ideas. Now, when she entered conference rooms, people listened. Not because they feared her, but because they respected her. In one strategy meeting, she stood at the front of the room, confidently guiding her team through a bold new campaign launch. "What if we lead with authenticity instead of projection?" she suggested, gesturing toward the screen. "Consumers don't just want innovation. They want honesty." Her team nodded thoughtfully, building on her ideas rather than dismissing them. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, Ethan paused. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. She stood tall, composed, assured. There was no trace of the hesitant woman who once absorbed criticism in silence. She had always possessed the capability. She had simply lacked the platform. Later that evening, As the office lights dimmed and employees trickled out, Lena stepped onto the rooftop garden for air. The city stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in deep orange and fading gold. She heard footsteps behind her. "You handled that meeting well," Ethan said. She turned, smiling softly. "You were watching." "I try not to miss important things," he replied. They stood beside the glass railing, the wind lifting the edges of her curls gently. "For a while," she said quietly, "I thought hard work was enough." "It should be," Ethan answered, "when integrity leads." There was no rush in their conversation. No dramatic declarations. Just shared understanding. He had seen her at her lowest, when no recognition was offered, when injustice pressed heavily on her shoulders. And she had seen him when he appeared powerless. There was something grounding about that. Weeks later, the company hosted its annual corporate gala, the first under Ethan's leadership. The ballroom shimmered with golden light from crystal chandeliers. Employees dressed in formal attire mingled confidently, laughter replacing the cautious whispers that once filled gatherings. Ethan stood at the podium in a classic black tuxedo, addressing the crowd. "This year," he said warmly, "we didn't just improve our numbers. We improved who we are." Applause followed. He spoke about integrity, about second chances, about the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. As he stepped down from the podium, his eyes found Lena across the room. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her natural elegance. Confidence radiated from her, not because of her title, but because she knew she had earned her place. Later that night, beneath the soft glow of rooftop lights and the distant hum of the city below, Ethan led her back to the terrace where so many of their quiet conversations had unfolded. The air was calm. The skyline glittered. "There's something I've learned this year," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "That leadership," he continued, "is about choosing the right person to stand beside you." Before she could respond, he stepped back and lowered to one knee. Her breath caught. In his hand, a small velvet box opened to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "I didn't fall in love with the woman who became head of creative strategy," he said softly. "I fell in love with the woman who showed kindness to a janitor when she thought no one important was watching." Tears filled her eyes. The city lights blurred behind him. "Yes," she whispered, before he could finish the question. He slipped the ring onto her finger as laughter broke through her tears. It was not a fairy tale born from power. It was a partnership born from truth. Months later, beneath a floral arch bathed in golden sunset light, they stood before friends, colleagues, and family. Ethan wore an elegant cream tuxedo jacket. Lena stood radiant in a timeless white gown, her natural curls beautifully styled, her smile steady and full. As they exchanged vows, there was no shadow of humiliation lingering in memory. Only growth. Only renewal. Coal Industries thrived in the years that followed, not because it feared its CEO, but because it trusted its leadership. And in the quiet moments between board meetings and strategic launches, Ethan would sometimes glance at Lena and remember the first day she apologized to a janitor for the mess on her desk. The day he realized that integrity does not need an audience. It simply needs the opportunity to stand. And this time it did. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Do well to like and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.